When I almost got burned alive by a crazy guy in the woods. About 3 years ago, I went on my first wildfire. I just recently become a certified firefighter, and I finally got sent out on a 2-week deployment. Without being too specific, let's just say the fire was deep in north central Idaho. It had immensely steep mountains and ultra dense forest. I didn't really have any idea of what to expect. You always hear about wildfires on the news, but it wasn't anything like what actually happens. I expected to show up and be seen as a hero. It turns out the area I went to was very familiar with wildfires. Over decades, many of the locals actually grew to hate the firefighters and federal government. Many locals felt that the government was exploiting the fires for money, so they purposefully would take a long time fighting the fires. One city nearby blames the government for allowing a fire to burn down more than 50 homes. The first day we were told to stay away from the locals because they would often approach as friendly, but then become confrontational, even violent. On our way to the fire lines, there were signs hung on trees saying things like, "Turn back now," or "Hope you burn in hell." Needless to say, it was a little unsettling. We continued for a few days without issue. A few days later, we got assigned to a new area. We had a rather large engine with lots of water and supplies, so we normally just patrolled the fire borders to make sure the fire didn't jump the defensive lines. One day an old man comes driving up on his ATV and starts asking questions about the fire. He informed us that he was a nearby resident and just wanted to be updated. We told him the general information about the fire. He thanked us and was about to drive away when he turned around. He told us not to go up Red Leaf Road, as old Joe lived up there and hated firefighters. A day later, we got placed on structure protection. We were to go home and help prepare them because the fire was coming dangerously close. We then went to our assigned house. We actually waited outside the gate for a few minutes to get a little game plan going. We drove up to the house to find a man waiting with a gun on his lap. We carefully approached him. It was a time from the ATV earlier. Apparently some people dressed as firefighters came to his house earlier, demanding his evacuation. He left his home, but the people were fake firefighters and robbed him while he was gone. Luckily, we had a massive truck to help prove our legitimacy, so he kindly put his gun away. We helped him prep his house. As we did, he told us all stories about old Joe, who lived at the very top of the lane. He said Joe was a big-time conspiracy theorist who had probably hundreds of guns and was famous for his hate for the government. I know it sounds straight out of a movie. Some old anti-government guy living in the mountains with tons of guns, but it was all true. Old Joe was secretive. Even amongst his neighbors, nobody really knew exactly who he was. He said neighbors only really spoke to him in passing on the narrow dirt roads. They just knew he was shooting guns all day and always preaching about his hate for the government. A few days later, we were fighting on the front lines. Each area has a commander who is in charge. Before we went out for the day, our commander briefed us. He also mentioned old Joe and said that nobody was going to know near his property. He also told us about our evacuation point for it if the fire were to get out of control. It happened to a nearby rock quarry. I was out digging some fire line when a loud tone went over the radio, and all units in the area were asked to evacuate to the quarry. After arriving, we were told someone spotted a new fire forming below everyone on the main fire line, including me. This is especially dangerous because fire moves uphill very quickly. It is also so smoky that we could barely see 30 feet in front of us. A fire could easily surround you without you knowing. We waited for an hour or so before the commander asked for a volunteer engine to go scout the new fire start. An engine crew that we had befriended volunteered, and shortly after departed. We then waited for what felt like 2 or 3 hours. Finally, the volunteer engine crew came back. They briefed the commander and then came back towards my crew. Ricky, a crew member I befriended, hopped out of the truck with a sickly look on his face. He was pale, almost as if frail, as he stepped out. I asked him what was up. He said when they found the new fire, it was outside a large clearing. They got to investigate and found a freshly cut trail with footprints in the mud. They looked around further and could easily see that it had been started with a long line of gasoline. Someone had been there recently. A large line of gas was poured so that it would surround the fire crews above, including myself, and catching them off guard. They quickly hopped back into their engine and hauled us back to the quarry. It wasn't ever to be proven, but everyone was sure that, oh, Joe! And I failed to burn us 20 plus firefighters alive. Thankfully, a very keen firefighter had noticed a small orange glow below him through the heavy smoke. Had he not spotted it in time, the narrow and steep roads needed to escape would have likely been cut off. The gasoline lines were very carefully placed to cut off our escape. I was scarred for a long time afterwards. There was something extremely unsettling, knowing that someone was plotting your death, especially when you were completely unaware of it. Was Joe watching me? Was he hidden in the woods nearby, waiting for his plan to unfold? Luckily, I left a few days later, never to return, and hopefully never to meet old Joe. Police call from an abandoned house. From my early 20s to my mid to late 30s, I was a Garda officer in Ireland. That's what we call police in Ireland. I served a small community on the west coast, isolated from any other community, no trains, no nearby airports, no taxis, no Ubers, and only one bus a day. This is probably the only reason they had their own Garda station. Most other small hamlets just rely on the Garda from the nearest town. But given this town's absolute isolation in a very small country, they needed this station. The hamlet covered a wide area of farm plots and a number of empty and derelict properties. When Ireland becomes industrialized, most people in these rural communities move out to go to the cities in hopes of easier and better paying jobs. The hamlet has a very creepy feeling to it. Most residents here are some of the most down-to-earth people on the planet. But to the story, our Garda station consisted of 3 112 dispatchers. Most calls were routed to another 112 center, around 7 officers, most from out of town. We all knew each other well, and when we do get a call from the area, even if it is not an important issue, most of us come down just so we have something to do. During our long shifts, with very little activity, one night we received a call from a landline phone, originating from a derelict property on the edge of the hamlet, isolated from the other plots of land. I was asked to go alone, as every officer this side of the country was attending a fatal 3-car and 2-lorry crash that occurred on a nearby motorway, so I walked outside to the cold wind blowing over my skin. I got in my car and drove down to the property. No lights, no sirens. The call had been a hang-up, lasted no longer than 13 seconds, according to dispatch. As I pulled up to the blackened, beat-up property, I felt a shiver go down my spine. The old wooden farm outside gave a feeling that I cannot describe or put into words. I didn't feel like I was welcome. I got out of my car, walked to the front of the property, opened the moldy wet gate, and slowly, very slowly, approached a tall front door. I knocked heavily and exclaimed, "Hello? This is Officer, my name. I'm from Garda. Would you let me in?" I got no response. After waiting for 20 seconds or so I knocked again and said, "Hello? I'm afraid that if you don't answer the door, I might have to make forced entry. Please, come to the door. This is the Garda." Again, no response. I almost wished there was, though, just so I would feel less lonely and vulnerable. I got on the radio and asked dispatch for backup, and that there could only be people in the property. I need to make forced entry, as no one was answering the door. What was going on? They replied, saying that I should keep an eye on the property, and they have an officer from the closest town over here in 25 minutes. I grunted to myself and thanked dispatch. I strolled back to my car. Before I could reach to open the gate, at the front of the house I looked back and saw an old, ill-looking man, unshaven, stare down at me from an attic window. I stared back in shock, pulled out my flashlight, turned it on, and flashed out the window. The man ducked down. I shut up the window. "Sir, you need to come down and get to the door. I need to talk to you. We have more Garda officers on the way. Come downstairs." I was unsettled by what this was turning into. I informed dispatch of man, and they replied saying that they will inform the incoming Garda car that they should turn on sirens and get down here as fast as possible. Dispatch seemed uneasy, to say the least. I stood by the front gate, still no one at my front door, just scanning all the windows, expecting to see that face. I just couldn't get the man's face out of my mind. He just looked so disturbed. After maybe 20 minutes of the occasional knock on the door and the expected non-existent reply, the car finally pulled up. I informed the 2 officers inside the situation, and we approached the front door. And one of the officers exclaimed in a deep, angry voice, "Sir, please get to this door before we have to get the door for you. As it appears, you will not get the door. We need to inform you of how this is going to work. We will knock this door down. Upon our entry, you will stand, hands up, on the other side of the room we enter from. We will handcuff you, and you will be taken to the station, questioned or detained. If you have a problem with this, then be sure to ask. When you're in our Garda cars, that is." The officer was so demanding, I almost felt like he was talking to me. He was a very tall and threatening man. We walked back to the car, and he took out what we called the big red key, a big hunk of metal that we used to break down doors safely, and while not damaging the door at all, I guess. The two officers grabbed the key, walked to the door, and said, 1, 2, 3, brush, and I hit the door 4 times solid, before I fell down in one big thump. The house was now open. We grabbed our flashlights in one hand and tasers in the other. We took our first steps inside, and I could hear the shards of glass crunching under our feet. The other officer shouted, "Sir, guard officers have entered the property. Please reveal yourself with your hand in the air. We are armed with tasers, and we are authorized to use it." We moved forward, slowly, shining the small beams of white light into all corners of the apparently empty living room. Upon noticing the absence of the man in the single downstairs room, we shone our lights up the crooked-looking stairs. But before we can begin to move up the stairs, a man jumped from the upper floor and onto the stairs, and I mean jumped. He looked insane with his large red eyes, staring into my soul. I shouted at the massive beast the man was, "Sir, place your hands upon your head." Very slow. Before I could finish my sentence, the man charged down the stairs, yelling. One of the officers screamed, "Taser, taser, taser!" And the man let out a gut-wrenching yell of pain as he flopped on the floor, and we ran towards him, handcuffs ready. We grabbed the man, who wouldn't stop rumbling on about a supposed big man who gave him food every single day. We placed him in the back of my car. The other officers drove behind me as we headed back to the station. In the car, I did the ordinary, told him his rights and everything that comes with that. But before I could finish, he kept asking if I could tell his ex-wife to get out of the car because she was being rude. I just told him that it was just me and him in the car, and he wouldn't stop going on about it. We arrived at the station. We walked the man to the front desk, and when we asked his name, he just replied, "The man you all want to know." Eventually, we put his name on other information as simply unknown. The next day, we were told that the man was going to be picked up by the Irish Intelligence Service. Apparently, once my colleagues had got the name of the man, he was wanted for stalking a minor, child abuse, 3 charges of that, and possession of child pornography. Knowing what this creep man had been involved in made it so much worse for me to think about it. Once the service came to pick him up, the man told every officer in the station that he would find a way to get to us and do what God has told me to do. So, whoever you are, I really hope that we never, ever meet again. To my incredibly cruel 3rd grade teacher, an Ask Reddit question made me recount this memory, and it brought back some old feelings, I'll be honest. I felt compelled to share the story. Maybe some of you can relate to this experience that I had. So it's a bit more unusual than your usual let's not meet story on here. My 3rd grade teacher was a bully, a flippin' bully. I have no clue why she didn't like me, but she didn't. In fact, one could argue that she loathed me. She scarred me for a good while. Nothing meant more to me than the approval of the adults. My go-to highlights from that school year in telling this story constantly put me in the timeouts by sending me to the front corner of the classroom for everyone to stare at me. She never did this to any of the other students, at least never in my class. I could not remember why she did this, but I specifically remember being afraid of her and always trying to be on my best behavior to avoid this. It didn't matter. Then, when I'd stand there for what felt like forever, missing the lesson and feeling eyes on me, I given and asked how long I had to stand there since she would never tell me. She'd just stop and direct all the attention to me and loudly tell me, "You're still standing there." If I were you, I would have gone back and sat down already. But then again, I'm smarter than you. It was so confusing. All I know now is that she did it to make me look and feel stupid. I was always participating in classes growing up. I took pride in it, and it helped me learn the material. She purposely ignored me every single time I raised my hand, and then gave me bad marks about my participation to take home. For birthdays, she would put a cutout balloon on the giant calendar by the door with your name written on it, so everyone could see and wish you happy birthday when they walked in. On my birthday, I had no balloon, so one of my friends went up to the teacher and let her know it was my birthday in case she forgot. She then very loudly, so all the students would hear her while staring me in the eyes, exclaimed, "I'm not wishing her a happy birthday because she didn't bring anything for the class." On the day before our class Christmas party before break, we were all making our paper stockings to hang up for students to put goodies in. She walked over and saw I cut mine a bit skinnier than the average stocking, grabbed it, and held it in the air while loudly stating, "Look, class, this is Jackie's getting a real pencil for Christmas." Cue her and everyone laughing. One day during class, we were all reading. My friend sitting next to me whispered to ask what page we were on because she hadn't been paying attention. All I did was tell her the page number quietly, and out of nowhere, I felt a hard smack on the back of my head. My teacher smacked me, saying I was rude, disruptive, and disrespectful to the entire class. In the spring, my school had a field day where the kids would all participate in races and games for prizes. I did the pie eating contest, and prizes were cute little victory headbands. I won, but she refused to give me a headband. Then, when it was time for the race portion, I went to go set up my blanket I brought to sit on the ground with, and as I'm setting my blanket down, my teacher literally jumped in and claimed my spot, telling me I was too late and couldn't sit there, then smirked while saying as I walked away, "Couldn't even get to the ground quick enough if you fell face first." One day during lunch, some of the kids at my table were getting rowdy and throwing food. Nothing huge, but enough for my teacher to notice this whole entire situation. On the walk back to class, after sending a few of those involved to the principal, she asked the group if there was anyone else who had seen or done anything. Now, I've had someone tell me that this was karma for tattling, but screw that, this was intentional and cruel. I raised my hand to tell her about one other little boy who was the ringleader of the whole incident, but instead of letting me speak, she refused to hear what I had to say and immediately sent me to the office. Then when the kids in trouble and I were in the principal's office, she openly lied to the principal to get me in trouble, stating that she saw me laughing and encouraging the kids who were throwing food. I was sitting on the other side of the table, not engaging in the slightest. I stayed quiet, and it hurts my heart looking back now that I did, because I remember feeling so damn small and defeated in that moment. There are more of those, but these stick with me most. She was just so mean, so petty, always tried humiliating me. I was an 8-year-old, polite if not a bit of a goofball, but never meant any harm, never an active troublemaker. And I'll never forget how awful she constantly made me feel. How she always almost made it her personal mission, I guess, to have the class staring or laughing at me. How she belittled me and bullied me. The pleasure she took in embarrassing me and creating opportunities just to embarrass me. A little kid. I don't know why I didn't say anything to my parents at the time. She intimidated me pretty good, and I think seeing her lie to the principal and him believe her over me made me think the same would happen with my parents. I did tell them years later after we moved and such, but I wish I told them sooner. Wherever you are, Miss Whetstone, screw you. Let's never ever ever meet again.